The hum of the engine was the only sound accompanying the nervous thrum in my chest, a feeling that whispered of something missed, something vital. I was supposed to be airborne halfway to Oakhaven, heading toward my sister's peaceful retreat for the holidays. My suitcase was already checked through, the weight of the past weeks momentarily lifted. Yet, as I turned the sedan into the long-term parking expanse, a sudden cold certainty seized me. Alistair's will, the original, had been left behind. Not the familiar desktop copy, but the single, definitive document. The kind of oversight that should be negligible but, in that moment, felt like a dangerous prophecy. I spun the car around, calculating a quick 5-minute retrieval. But when the front door of my house, the cedars, creaked open, softly, unnervingly, the air inside felt heavy, too still, erasing the peace of the warm afternoon sun outside. I gripped the keys in my palm instead of dropping them into the usual bowl, pausing, heart slow and heavy. Then, from the study, the voices began, low, deliberate, and chillingly familiar. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, barely allowing myself to breathe. "If she's showing signs, we can make the case," my only son, Sterling, stated, his voice stripped of all warmth. A terrifying blueprint for my own future was being laid out just steps away. "She's 74, replied the second voice, which I instantly recognized as Ashera, the one Sterling had brought around after Alistair's passing, under the guise of helping sort through his affairs. Sterling continued, dismissing his mother's lifetime of work and sacrifice. "With the right filing, diminished capacity isn't hard to demonstrate, Torvin." Torvin, the lawyer Sterling had introduced, supposedly to simplify the affairs of the estate. My heart became a stone in my chest. I couldn't risk revealing my presence. Stepping forward, shouting his name, was instantly discarded in favor of a silent retreat. I moved backward with excruciating care, fearing every brush of shoe against the wood floor, needing desperately to avoid the smallest sound that might betray me. Outside, the late afternoon sun felt deceptively warm, while every atom within me had gone cold. Sitting back in the car, keys still clutched in my hand, I stared blankly through the windshield. The realization was a devastating blow. The woman who had painstakingly worked night shifts in archives, ensuring Sterling could attend university without the burden of loans, was now being systematically catalogued, reduced to a file in a case. This shock gave way to a deeper, more painful truth. It wasn't just the betrayal I had just overheard, but the long, quiet process of ignoring what I already knew. The realization was the moment something inside me shifted, cooling the remaining warmth in my chest. I understood now that I had witnessed my own child transforming into a stranger within the confines of my own home. This, I knew with absolute certainty, was the day I ceased to operate as a mother first, and started becoming something else entirely, a survivor. I bypassed the airport entirely, forgetting the call I should have made to my sister. My hands maintained a steady grip on the wheel, while my mind detached, following an inner guidance. Instinct drew me past the major interstate turnoff and onto older, familiar routes I hadn't traveled in decades. I eventually parked in front of the Daily Crumb, a small bakery nestled between a brightly lit laundry facility and a faded, worn barber shop. Although the awning was new, the aroma pouring through the open door was a powerful, comforting anchor. The precise blend of cinnamon, melting butter, and toasted almonds. This was the place Alistair had faithfully brought me every Sunday, without fail, back when we occupied a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near Cedar Avenue. This was the era when Sterling was still just a curious boy, defined by scraped knees and a mind bursting with nascent inventions. Inside, the sleek, polished counter contrasted with the charmingly mismatched tables, each adorned with a simple vase of fresh flowers. I ordered a large coffee and settled into a window seat, wrapping my fingers tightly around the warm cup, desperately seeking something tangible to anchor my fractured reality. My gaze fell upon the people hurrying by on the sidewalk, bundled in thick coats against the gathering chill. I vividly recalled Alistair sitting at this very table, engrossed in his newspaper, while a much younger Sterling meticulously stacked sugar packets into ambitious, gravity-defying towers. He had always been so inquisitive, questioning the intricate mechanics of bridges, the complex routes of trains, and the internal workings of elevators. He never settled for simple answers. He demanded blueprints, and I had dutifully provided them. I scoured the Metropolitan Archives library for books, highlighting specific paragraphs in pencil, and ensured he was enrolled in robotics camp before he even articulated the desire. He was, back then, innately curious, never entitled. The transformation, I realized, hadn't been an abrupt eruption like a forgotten kettle. It had been a slow, insidious process, a quiet accumulation of steam before the room filled with the hiss of control. I recalled the moments when Sterling insisted on taking charge of Alistair's estate, claiming the responsibility was too much for me to handle, when he abruptly replaced our long-standing family accountant with an unknown modern firm, when he unilaterally set up automatic payments for my property taxes without ever consulting me. I had deliberately misinterpreted these actions, extending the benefit of the doubt, a weary mother's trust, a widow's desperate hope. Now, seeing the pieces rearranged, the picture was sickeningly, definitively clear. I finished less than half of the coffee. The lingering bitterness on my tongue came not from the beans, but from the searing memory of misplaced trust. The sky outside had dulled to a deep gray. I zipped my coat up to my chin, standing still for a necessary moment of recalibration. I understood I was not yet ready to face home, not out of fear, but because I needed to recall the woman I had been before I allowed others to define my value. This quiet, purposeful detour was the beginning of my self-reclamation. The parking lot adjacent to the Metropolitan Archives was largely deserted when I arrived in the late afternoon, the sky already sinking into the soft, early winter gray. I instinctively chose the same parking spot I had favored during my years working there, a reflex born of muscle memory and long-established habit. I sat briefly, watching the large oak tree branches near the back door sway gently in the rising wind. Stepping inside, the building was quieter than I remembered, marked by modernized checkout stations and newly installed carpets. Yet the familiar scent remained, a comforting blend of ink, dust, and old wood, a fragrance that consistently made me feel composed, capable, and whole. I bypassed the familiar fiction aisles, walking straight toward the back, heading for the archives room. Little had changed there. The same rows of tall beige filing cabinets, the overhead lights that cast a faint flicker if one looked too intently. I offered a professional nod to the young archivist at the desk, and made a casual request to review a specific document I had once catalogued, a copy of my late husband's will. She accepted the request without question, sliding a clipboard toward me and gesturing toward a secluded corner table. I located the correct file folder without any hesitation. My hand seemed to possess an independent memory of where to look. The folder itself was thick, not due to the will's length, but because of Alistair's detailed, clipped annotations. He had a lifelong habit of annotating everything, his margins filled with dates, arrows, and abbreviations that formed a precise system. Over our years together, his system had become perfectly legible to me. I spread the pages out meticulously, scanning each line, confirming the will remained intact and untouched. But it was the small, sticky notes tucked within the folder that demanded my attention. One note, written in his precise hand, read, "Ilara, if you ever feel unsure, the answer is always in the numbers." I turned to the final page, reviewing the chart, a meticulous breakdown of assets, including property, investments, and bonds. Next to each entry were further instructions: Ilara to retain, or Ilara or Sterling if qualified. Legal hold until independent review. He had explicitly written not Sterling to manage, nor full access for son. Alistair had been rigorously precise. He had trusted me. A warmth spread through my chest, a sensation of powerful recognition, the memory flooding back, feeling like the relief of finally slipping back into my own skin. I pulled a notepad from my bag and began to construct a list. The first priority was obtaining official copies, the second, securing reliable legal counsel, and the third, initiating an audit of all recent account changes. I underlined each item with slow, steady pressure. By the time I left the Metropolitan Archives, the sun had completely disappeared, and the sky had settled into a soft navy blue. The biting cold air was irrelevant. I walked back to my car with a clear, definite purpose. My breath clouded briefly in front of me. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the confusion and the sensation of being managed had vanished. I felt like Alara Vance, the expert archivist who specialized in organizing rare collections, the woman who could cite complex policy by heart, and who had once located a lost Revolutionary War letter. I knew with certainty that I would find my way through this current crisis, one document at a time. The following morning I moved with a deliberate slowness, not because my body ached, but because I needed to maintain the illusion of fragility. I carefully tucked a miniature voice recorder, the kind I used for interviews at the archive, barely the size of my thumb, into the lining of my coat. I made sure the tiny red light blinked once, confirming it was running, before it disappeared entirely beneath the wool fabric. I left the front door unlocked, allowing the rising sun to cast long, deceptive shadows across the kitchen floor, deliberately leaving the overhead lights off. I prepared tea, spilling a tiny, inconsequential amount onto the counter, and left the kettle slightly ajar. These were subtle, minor omissions, the exact kind of mistakes that could easily be misinterpreted as forgetfulness. Sterling arrived by 10:30 a.m. I hadn't summoned him. He rarely bothered with a phone call before showing up anymore. He entered carrying a grocery bag and wearing the careful, practiced smile he always deployed when he wanted something from me. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, staring at a crossword puzzle that was conspicuously half-finished, a pen resting without its cap nearby. I looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. He leaned in, kissing my cheek, and immediately commented on the chill in the house. I simply nodded, suggesting I must have forgotten to adjust the thermostat again. He set the bag down, pulling out a container of prepared soup, a fresh loaf of bread, and a small tin of crackers. The performance had officially commenced. He asked about my sleeping habits, and I replied vaguely, saying I wasn't sure, before deliberately changing the subject mid-sentence. I allowed my hands to fumble slightly with the spoon. When he offered to heat the soup, I smiled sweetly, accepting as if he were granting me a significant favor. Sterling moved through the kitchen like he was conducting a silent inventory. His eyes systematically scanned the calendar on the wall, the prescription bottles by the sink, and the pile of unopened mail. He paused at a letter from the insurance company, commenting on it. I claimed I hadn't found the time to open it. He immediately offered to go through the papers for me. I simply pretended not to hear the offer. After we finished lunch, he leaned against the doorframe, observing me for an extended moment. Then came the confirmation I had been waiting for. He spoke softly, carefully, stating that he had been researching care homes. Just options, he insisted, places offering gardens, music therapy, and dedicated staff trained in memory care. He framed it as an act of kindness. I blinked slowly, then offered a faint smile, remarking that perhaps it would be pleasant to have someone else take care of the cooking. Finally, to solidify the illusion, I asked him what day it was. He looked visibly satisfied. As he gathered and packed away the dishes, I sat utterly quiet, gazing out the window. The tiny recorder had meticulously captured every word, every calculated pause, and every feigned kindness. Once he departed, I immediately locked the door and retreated to the study. I removed the coat, placing the recorder gently on the desk. My hands were perfectly steady. I replayed the conversation in my mind, focusing not on the anger, but on the precision of the evidence. Now I possessed something far greater than shaky memory. I had undeniable proof, and the strategic silence, which had once felt unbearable, had become my most formidable asset. The following morning, I located Lyra's outdated number in a yellowed Rolodex, which was tucked behind my oldest cookbook. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Our connection had simply frayed after Alistair's death. We had spent 15 years working together at the university library. Lyra was renowned for her sharpness, always anticipating outcomes and capable of spotting the fatal flaw in a plan before it ever manifested. Called and left a voicemail. My voice was level, direct, and concise. I explained that I urgently needed a trusted legal mind and that the matter was deeply personal. Within the hour, she responded via text, confirming she would arrive at the Cedars by 4 p.m. When Lyra arrived, her presence immediately grounded the room without overpowering it. She wore a classic navy wool coat, her hair secured in a severe, tight knot. She looked precisely like the capable woman I remembered. Composed, professional, and devoid of unnecessary pleasantries or forced smiles. We settled at the kitchen table, and I poured chamomile tea into 2 mismatched cups. I then slid the recorder and the file containing Alistair's annotated will across the table toward her. I offered no immediate explanation, just quiet trust. Lyra listened to the entire recording in silence. Her expression remained unreadable, unchanged. When the playback concluded, she looked up, meeting my eyes, and spoke with unwavering confidence. "We're going to fix this." She opened her laptop, her fingers moving swiftly. She first inquired about my existing power of attorney, POA, and whether it had been updated since Alistair's death. When I confirmed it had not, she nodded. Her first step would be to formally revoke Sterling's authority. Next, we would draft a new will, designate a trusted executor, and notify the state of all changes. Every transaction, she emphasized, would be thoroughly documented and precisely time-stamped. She asked if I possessed any digital backups of critical documents, and when I replied no, she assured me we would rectify that immediately. Over the next hour, she meticulously outlined a strategic plan. It was meticulous, quiet, and fully legal. Everything Sterling had presumptuously assumed I had forgotten, I was now preparing to completely rewrite. Lyra's precision was never cold. She expressed no surprise, noting she had seen similar situations before, perhaps not always with children, but certainly with individuals who confuse granted access with full ownership. We moved to the den where she scanned copies of Alistair's annotated will. She immediately helped me establish encrypted cloud storage, creating a dedicated folder clearly labeled Elara Legal Private. She patiently demonstrated how to update entries, where to securely store my medical reports, and which versions of the documents were essential to retain. Before her departure, she placed a single sheet of paper before me. A formal, legal revocation of the power of attorney. It contained my new name, Sterling's name, and the current date. I signed it decisively. She slid the official paper into her briefcase. Her final assurance was simple and direct. "This is the first step." After she left, I sat by the window, observing the bare branches of the dogwood tree swaying in the evening wind. The house was quiet once more. But this time the silence was not hollow. It was the sound of something solid and durable being reconstructed. It was rebuilt one clear decision, one notarized document, and one rediscovered version of myself at a time. And crucially, I was no longer navigating this ordeal alone. The days that followed unfolded with quiet, archival precision. Lyra had initially supplied me with a checklist, but by the second morning, I no longer required it. The methodical rhythm of self-protection settled into a comfortable routine, reminiscent of the order I had embraced during my early archiving years, when preserving each document story was my sole focus. I began with the medical foundation. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Thorne, my physician for over a decade. During the consultation, I specifically requested a cognitive evaluation. I had no doubt regarding my clarity, but I required the official statement in writing. Dr. Thorne did not question my request. He performed the assessment, checked my reflexes, and thoroughly reviewed my chart. He then handed me a signed letter. Cognitively sound, no signs of impairment. I folded the official document carefully and immediately filed it into the designated folder I now carried everywhere. Back at the Cedars, I systematically gathered everything that confirmed my current mental clarity. This included dated grocery receipts, bank statements featuring my handwritten notes in the margins, and emails I had printed out over the last 2 years. I created lists and dated every single page. I categorized and organized them rigorously. Legal, medical, personal, labeling the physical folders with the same clear, consistent, and irrefutable system I had utilized for historical collections. Every page was scanned into my new, encrypted cloud storage system. Lyra had guided me through the process twice, and now I could operate the scanner she lent me. Small but exceptionally fast, with ease. Each file was saved with an exact timestamp. Every single document represented another small, solid brick in the protective wall I was constructing between my true self and the fragile, confused persona Sterling was convinced I had become. Deep within the back of my closet, concealed behind old winter coats and a perpetually unused suitcase, I discovered a long-forgotten box labeled Alistair Mace. Inside were various letters, mostly mundane notes from our early marriage years. Grocery lists, quick reminders, and small hearts drawn beside his name. But one item stood out. A single handwritten page in his bold script, dated 10 years prior. There was no envelope. It was simply folded into quarters and tucked between two old travel brochures. It read, "If the day comes when our son makes you doubt yourself, trust your instinct. You've always seen clearer than you believe." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter resting in my lap. The house was silent, yet my heart beat with a steady, certain rhythm. The wind outside gently brushed against the windows, like quiet fingertips. Alistair had known. Not the specifics, perhaps, but he had recognized the deep-seated possibility. He had seen something I was not yet ready to acknowledge. I was ready now. That night I performed another exhaustive backup of everything. Copies were securely sent to Lyra, and a dedicated flash drive was placed into the safety deposit box. I added a final entry to my journal. There is no such thing as over-prepared when someone is trying to erase you. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, without needing to check the locks or keep the hallway light burning. The work was done, and I was no longer playing a defensive game. I was meticulously documenting my survival in my own hand, in real time. Sterling reappeared on a Wednesday. There was no advance call, no warning text, just the doorbell ringing precisely after noon. I took a slow, centering breath and walked to the door without haste. When I opened it, he stood there holding a paper bag and a small bouquet of supermarket tulips. He wore the familiar soft expression he used to exhibit after being caught sneaking a forbidden snack before dinner. I stepped aside, allowing him entry without speaking a greeting. The tulips were a bright yellow. I thanked him and carefully arranged them in the old green vase on the dining room table. He immediately commented on the house's quiet atmosphere, claiming it felt peaceful, and I agreed. He unpacked the bag in the kitchen without seeking permission. A container of vegetable soup, a crusty roll, and a chocolate bar. I offered to warm the soup, but he dismissed the offer and did it himself. He moved through my kitchen with the unconscious ease of ownership. He always had. We sat opposite each other at the table. He inquired about my sleep. I replied that some nights were distinctly better than others. He nodded sagely and asked if I had given any thought to hiring someone to check in, perhaps once or twice per week. I responded that it might not be a poor idea. I allowed my spoon to linger deliberately in the broth. My hands moved slower than they truly were capable of. He watched me intensely, the way one monitors a crucial dial they have recently adjusted. Then he began discussing the facilities he had investigated, assisted living communities, boasting wellness programs, walking paths, and private rooms. He spoke gently, presenting it solely as a constructive suggestion. He insisted that I deserved rest and that being alone too frequently was unsafe. I looked down, running my fingers lightly along the edge of the napkin, and murmured that I would certainly consider his options. His face visibly softened, perhaps showing a fleeting look of relief. When he offered to drive me to tour one of the places the following week, I offered the softest of smiles and said, "Perhaps." Then, playing my part, I asked him to remind me what day it was. He told me, and I nodded as if the information had just returned to me. I permitted the pause to stretch, holding the silence between us. He stayed for another 30 minutes, walking through the hallway as though cataloging things I might have overlooked. He pointed out a barely flickering light bulb in the utility room and mentioned that the porch railing appeared slightly loose. I mentally took note of every single observation he made. Before leaving, he gently touched my shoulder and stated that all he desired was the best outcome for me. I placed my hand over his and stated simply I knew. As soon as the front door closed, I immediately walked to the back window and watched him. He sat in his car for a surprisingly long time, typing something into his phone. His lips moved slightly, as if he were silently rehearsing a key phrase. I turned and went into the study. The small recorder, concealed perfectly beneath the napkin holder, had been running since the moment he arrived. Every suggestion, every careful word, was now securely archived. Later that evening I uploaded the file, labeling it precisely, Visit Grant Assisted Living Discussion. His performance had been nearly flawless, but my meticulous record was perfect. The morning after Sterling's visit, I rearranged the furniture in the living room. It wasn't necessary for aesthetics, but I needed to create a strategic space beneath a side table for a second backup recording device. Placement was paramount. Sterling tended to pace near the large window when he felt nervous or pressured. I tested the angle and confirmed the microphone's range would also capture any conversation held on the porch. I left the front door unlocked again, a silent sign of openness and feigned vulnerability. I then moved around the kitchen, deliberately setting subtle signals of forgetfulness. I left the refrigerator door slightly ajar. I placed the measuring cup in the sink instead of returning it to the designated cabinet. Passing the hallway mirror, I lightly tousled my hair, ensuring I looked slightly unkempt, as though I hadn't quite noticed my appearance. At 10:40 a.m., his car crunched onto the gravel path again. He approached the steps, humming a quiet tune. I stepped onto the porch, pulling my cardigan tightly around my shoulders, and inquired what had brought him back so soon. He claimed he was merely in the neighborhood, just checking in. He handed me a new packet of materials from the care center he had previously mentioned. I accepted it using both hands, allowing my fingers to display a slight tremor. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I sat down on the porch swing and asked him what time it was. He smiled, answering softly, and sat down beside me. I glanced down at the folder and whispered that the photographs inside looked pleasant. He leaned in, meticulously describing the walking paths and the music room, speaking as though he were selling a desirable vacation home. He then swiftly brought up the subject of paperwork, stating he had conversed with someone named Torvin, a legal advisor he fully trusted. He explained that Torvin could help file the necessary documents. He claimed he wanted everything finalized so there would be absolutely no confusion if something happened to me. I nodded slowly, maintaining my focus on the street. He stepped away briefly to accept a phone call. I heard his voice, drifting through the open window, clear but intentionally subdued. Torvin's name surfaced again, followed by calculated phrases such as expedited review and mental competence. He mentioned the plans for next week, stating I was close to ready. I remained completely still, neither rigid nor stiff, just listening intently. The strategically placed porch microphone captured every damning word. When he returned, he brought me a cup of tea. I thanked him and asked if we had discussed these particular plans during his last visit. He smiled, seemingly proud of my momentary recollection. He then asked if I wished to tour the center on Thursday. I replied that I would need to think about it. I took a careful sip of the tea, letting the flavor linger, and mused that it reminded me of something Alistair used to prepare. He offered no response, simply nodding, and stated he would call me the next day. After his car disappeared down the road, I went inside and carefully retrieved the mic hidden under the porch ledge. I uploaded the new file to the archive folder, labeling it unambiguously. Lyra visited that same night. She brought her tablet, and together we transferred all the recent recordings and files onto two separate encrypted backups. I showed her the notes Sterling had left in the care center brochure. He had circled a specific line in the admissions policy that read, "Transfer of medical proxy contingent on observed need." Lyra looked at me, then handed me a folder of her own. Inside was a sworn affidavit, formally confirming my current legal and medical capacity, signed by Dr. Thorne and 2 separate notaries. The rules of the game had officially shifted. Sterling genuinely believed he was cornering me, yet I was meticulously documenting his every action. For the first time in many years, I felt I was not merely surviving. I was actively preparing to be seen and validated. 3 days after Sterling's second visit, Lyra submitted the formal response to Torvin's law office. The envelope was intentionally heavy, containing the mountain of documentation: the notarized affidavit of mental capacity, the newly signed power of attorney, the revised will, and a formal written notice declaring all previous authorizations null and void. Everything was flawlessly logged, time-stamped, and signed in duplicate. This filing was not a declaration of outright war, but a solid legal shield. Lyra ensured personal delivery, foregoing email. She made a quiet visit to the downtown legal complex, where Torvin's firm occupied a second-floor office above a busy dental practice. She left the envelope with the receptionist, requesting only that it be placed directly into Torvin's hands. Then she simply walked away. That evening Lyra called me. Her voice was calm, but held an unreadable quality beneath the composure. She explained that Torvin had called her personally shortly after receiving the file. He had not attempted to argue or defend his position. Instead, he said something remarkable: that he had carefully reviewed all the submitted evidence and would be stepping back from the situation. Then, without any prompting, he added that Alistair had once done him a great favor years ago, during a time when few others would. It wasn't a confession of collusion, but it was enough to crack the foundation of the manipulative structure Sterling had so carefully built. I sat contemplating that phone call, pulling out Alistair's old handwritten note again. I traced the final line with my thumb. The next day a letter arrived via courier. It was not from Sterling but from Torvin. It was a brief communication, typed on firm letterhead, stating officially that he would no longer be involved in any legal matters pertaining to my estate. Enclosed was a printed, comprehensive record of all documents filed on my behalf over the last 6 months, including every item Sterling had initiated. The paper trail was exhaustive, containing dates, digital logs, proposed drafts, and emails. I spent the entire afternoon reading every line. I saw phrases I recognized from conversations with Sterling, sentences repeated verbatim that he had used over soup. They appeared in a draft declaration of concern, which was attached to a formal guardianship proposal. There were even template pages designed to be filled in by neighbors or friends, documenting my observed memory issues. Sterling had been systematically constructing a silent case against me. Now I possessed his entire playbook. Called Lyra. We agreed upon the immediate next step. She would prepare a concise statement of intent, to be formally submitted if Sterling initiated any further legal motion. This was a warning, not an outright threat. Any attempt to undermine my legal rights would be publicly classified as legal overreach and elder coercion and would be put directly on the public record. That night, I placed Torvin's letter alongside Alistair's note in my nightstand drawer. 2 men, one who had quietly tried to destroy me, and one who had inadvertently left just enough light for me to find my path back. I felt no rush of triumph. I felt steady, as if I had moved out of a dangerous holding pattern and into clear, navigable air. The burdensome silence in the house no longer oppressed me. It now stood beside me, strong and patiently waiting. Sterling arrived without any prior notice. No call, no message, just the familiar crunch of his tires on the gravel and the slow creak of the front gate. I had been anticipating this. Torvin's letter had caused a decisive shift, and I knew Sterling would not wait long to reassert his presumed control. I watched from the window as he approached the path, a single folder tucked under his arm. His pace was measured, but his shoulders were tightly rigid. The mask of concerned compassion was still in place, but it was thinner now, stretched taut over something sharp and anxious. When I opened the door, I showed no surprise. I simply stepped aside and invited him in. He followed me into the kitchen. I had intentionally warmed cider on the stove, allowing the comforting scent of cinnamon to fully permeate the house. He immediately commented on the aroma. He didn't take a seat. He placed his folder on the table and remained standing, as if awaiting a cue. I poured 2 cups of cider. I handed him one, and then took my seat directly across the table. The distance between us felt clean, almost ritualistic. He started softly, mentioning that Torvin had withdrawn unexpectedly, leaving matters in an unclear place. I nodded calmly. He stated he harbored concerns about certain essential paperwork being altered without his complete knowledge. I took a deliberate sip of my cider. Then, I reached into the drawer beside me and produced a small stack of papers. These were clean copies, not weapons, just undeniable facts. The new power of attorney, the updated and notarized will, the definitive statement from Dr. Thorne, and the affidavit of capacity. I slid them across the table, one document at a time. He didn't reach for them. He merely stared. I looked at him, not with anger or fear, but with absolute clarity. I told him that I had made responsible, legal decisions for myself. I stated that I knew precisely what I was doing, and that his continued pretense otherwise would not change the documented reality. He offered no verbal response. His jaw twitched once. His eyes scanned the documents again, then drifted up toward the hallway, as if searching for external signs, evidence that I had a witness present or that I was merely bluffing. Then I delivered the simple final sentence. Not all silence is weakness. He stood motionless for a moment longer. He slowly gathered the papers, placed them back down on the table without folding them, and walked straight toward the front door. He did not slam it. He didn't speak another word. He left exactly the way he had arrived. After the sound of his engine faded into the distance, I returned to the table. I retrieved the tiny recorder hidden beneath the napkin holder and stopped the device. The file name was already set in my mind. Quiet confrontation, full clarity. That night, my dreams were not troubled by Sterling's childhood, Alistair's fading voice, or legal phrases echoing in cold halls. I dreamed instead of a room filled with order, neatly labeled boxes, clean ledgers, and a window open to crisp, fresh air. For the first time in years, my decisions belonged entirely to me, and that feeling was fully sufficient. The silence that had dominated the Cedars for weeks began to change, not with intrusive noise, but with the presence of new life. Lyra's daughter, Kira, arrived just after noon on a bright Saturday. She carried a canvas duffel bag, a laptop bag, and possessed an easy, natural way of moving through the hallway, as if she were perfectly meant to be there. She was not loud, and she avoided unnecessary questions. She settled quietly into the small guest room, confidently plugging in her hard drive, organizing her dense textbooks, and stacking binders beside the nightstand. Kira was a student of archival science, and she already spoke with a calm, deliberate cadence that instantly reminded me of my own professional years at the university. By evening, the entire atmosphere of the house had shifted. She volunteered to prepare tea, standing in my kitchen with a familiar, comfortable air. She hummed softly while waiting for the kettle, not a frantic sound, but the quiet tune of a folk song I hadn't heard in decades. The subtle scent of lemon verbena tea drifted peacefully through the hallway. Later that night, I could hear her typing faintly down the hall. The sound was steady, not rushed or frantic. It brought back memories of Alistair's old typewriter, the one he kept stored in the basement long after word processors had taken over our lives. The rhythmic sound was deeply anchoring. Over the following days, Kira effortlessly integrated into the house's rhythm. She took out the trash without being asked. She printed fresh, clean labels for some of my older photo albums. She asked if she might digitize the handwritten notebooks I had used throughout my career at the Metropolitan Archives. She handled every item with meticulous care and never once tried to impress me. She simply and competently did the required work. On the third day, I handed the legal folder over to her. Not the fragile originals, but the clean, secure copies of everything. The medical affidavit, the POA, the newly revised will, and the complete audio transcripts. She stored them onto an encrypted drive, implemented comprehensive backup protocols, and uploaded the files into a university-grade secure cloud system. Sterling called that night. I saw his name light up on the screen, but I let the phone ring, refusing to answer. He left no message. Later, Kira sat at the dining table with her laptop and inquired if I would like to organize and label the remaining boxes in the garage with her the following morning. I readily said yes. It felt like agreeing to something far greater than cardboard and tape. It felt like saying yes to forward motion, to a life extending clearly beyond the necessity of constant defense. The rooms of the Cedars no longer echoed when I walked through them. The kitchen had fingerprints again. The floors required sweeping more frequently, and I found myself liking the mundane necessity of it. I wrote a single powerful sentence in my journal that night. The house is no longer quiet, and neither am I. The morning air had shifted perceptibly. The trees outside the window rustled with a quiet confidence, seemingly aware that one chapter had closed and another had irrevocably begun. I sat at my desk, my journal open, the same journal I had maintained since Alistair's passing. The pages felt thicker now, weighted not just by words, but by achieved clarity. I reflected on the distance I had traveled, a journey measured not in miles or professional achievements, but in the slow, deliberate walk back to my own identity. There had been no necessity for shouting or a final climactic door slam, only the patient gathering of small, crucial decisions, stacked like stones on the path I had carved out for myself. I turned to the last page. My pen moved with unwavering steadiness as I wrote. Let him speak first, then watch him fall. I closed the journal, placing it back into the drawer beside Alistair's final letter, and tucked the key securely into the pocket of my sweater. The kitchen was now warm. Kira had departed early for campus, but her teacup still rested by the sink. The steam was gone, but the reassuring memory of her presence lingered. I walked slowly through the house, my hand trailing along the walls. The family photographs were back in their proper place. The rug by the front door possessed a gentle fold where Kira's backpack had often been carelessly dropped. The lamp in the hallway flickered once, then settled back into its steady, reliable glow. Outside, the wind gently pushed against the glass. I stood at the window, watching the leaves turn over, gold on one side, fading green on the other. There was no public announcement, no audience needed. But I knew, deep within my core, that a specific part of the story had concluded. It was not the end of my life, but the end of the segment where I waited for someone else to dictate how it should unfold. And that knowledge was, in itself, an overwhelming victory. My quiet strength had ensured my survival, and my dignity required no one's permission.